Good afternoon from the garden. It's the 13th of August and yesterday we got back from our 3-week summer vacation. So in today's video I want to show you how our permaculture garden has coped with our 3-week absence. Obviously the middle of the summer is not an ideal time to go on holiday for a gardener, but because I come from the Czech Republic and my whole family lives there, a lot of my close friends too, and because my children go to school still, summer is the best time for us to, or the only time for us to visit for a longer period of time. This year has been an especially hard year for me to go away on vacation because it was the warmest and the driest summer on record. So I was afraid to leave my garden, to be honest, and it's interesting to see how it has coped. In the first week of our vacation we asked a friend to water the garden. So about 3 weeks ago is the last time it was watered. Our kind neighbors took care of the greenhouse for us. They watered the tomatoes in exchange for picking the ripe ones, but other than that the garden has been left to its own devices. Nobody has harvested, nobody has watered, and nobody has weeded. Overall, I'm quite pleased with and pleasantly surprised with how the garden has fared, and I think the key to our success here was mulch. Most of our beds, if not all of them, probably all of them, have been mulched with different organic materials. And here is a nice example, also a nice example with how I keep the garden productive over the whole growing season. This is my potato bed, and in a harvest video just before we left, I harvested the potatoes from this part of the bed. You can see there are still some plants here that we will be harvesting. I covered the bed with straw and I planted a courgette that I pre-sown at home. It was quite small when we left. This is what happened in 3 weeks and no watering. One of the main problems with leaving the garden in the middle of the summer, of course, is that a lot of things are ripening then. And it's a shame if you have worked towards the harvests and then you're not there to pick the vegetables. So I try to plan my crops in such a way that they ripen either before or after our vacation, and I deliberately delay some sowings. For example, here sweet corn. This was planted a little later than you could plant sweet corn. Normally it could be sown directly here at the beginning of May or planted pre-sown at around mid-May, but I planted about 3 weeks later so that it ripens later and we don't miss the harvest. There's another crop over here that I want to show you. Bush beans. These two could be sown in our climate in May, but then the risk is that a lot of them would be ripening around the time that we're on vacation, which is why I delayed the sowing, and these were sown on the 5th of July, and they're just flowering, so we'll be harvesting some shortly. Of course, not everything can be planned perfectly, and there's an example of that here. This is our snake cucumber, which we harvested the first fruits just before we left, but then it seems to have peaked during our vacation. Meanwhile, in the greenhouse, the tomatoes just kept on producing, and as I have mentioned before, our neighbors kindly watered the plants for us in exchange for the ripe fruits, but they stopped harvesting right before we came back, so there are lots of ripe tomatoes for us to pick now. We have different kinds of cherry tomatoes this year, and if you're interested in the varieties that we're growing, we have filmed a video about them before we went on vacation, and I'll put a link to that below. I have also picked a few eggplants and peppers. The melons are not ripe yet, so we have these to look forward to. And here's my basil, which ideally would be harvested or picked repeatedly before it starts flowering, because you want to keep it from flowering so that it keeps producing. So I'm going to try to rectify it, cut it back hard, and always cut back to a place where it's branching. and take out the flowers so that hopefully I can prolong its life so that we can harvest it from it for at least a few more weeks. The time before we go on vacation, about the first half of July, is a very important time for the second sowings and plantings in the garden. So it's definitely not ideal to go away right after that. But thanks to the shape our soil is in and the mulch that we use, it usually goes well. And I want to show you one example of this. It's my bed of different varieties of cabbages from the brassica family, which I pre-sown at home and planted about 2 days before we left for our vacation. Apart from this side, which is the 9-star perennial broccoli, that was planted a little earlier. But the kales and cabbages over here were really planted just 2 days before we left and watered thoroughly, but not watered afterwards at all. So I am really happy with how this turned out. Also, you can see that there are hardly any weeds. It's like, I wanted to say 5 minutes is enough to weed this bed, but I don't need 5 minutes. It's like, I could probably do it in a minute. So they're looking great. I kept them under the netting to prevent them from pests, to protect them from pests. And see, it's like no problem at all that they have not been cared for the past 3 weeks. So that was the kitchen garden part of our permaculture plot, but I also want to show you how the rest of the garden is doing. And the rest of our garden is planted as an edible forest, so that means it's planted mostly with perennials and not watered at all, actually. So here around the pergola we have planted lots of edible climbers, and they have put a lot of growth on, even though they have not been watered, because we have mulched them really well. So the soil under the layer of there was cardboard underneath the wood chips, and that has kept the soil moist. So you can see that there's a lot of growth. I think the grapevine here has put on about 1.5 meters in the 3 weeks, and things like the tiberry here as well. You can see it's bending, so this I have actually tried to fasten all the branches before we left, so I think it was about this tall. This is the last place where I put when I fastened it to the support. So it must have grown, I don't know, about 70 centimeters, maybe even more. This one too. It's like it was about this high and it has put on that much growth. I will have to get some twine and fasten it to the pergola. The cardboard is really very efficient in keeping the soil moist. This part you can see is covered with just cardboard, and what I want to show you is this goose braid that I planted right before we went away. Absolutely not an ideal time to plant fruiting bushes or any perennial plants, but I ordered some plants from Lubera to make use of the 20% promo code that they gave us after we published our video that we filmed at the nursery, and I had to plant them before we went away. So I did. I was worried about how the plants would fare, but I needn't have, because you can see they're absolutely fine without any watering, putting on growth actually. So I'm really happy about this. The older perennial plants in this part of the garden are also doing great. Like our walnut tree over there has the walnuts for the first time. This is the 3rd season. So I'm very happy about that. It's quite early for a walnut to start fruiting. And our different varieties of apples over here all have apples on them. So we're looking forward to an abundant fall harvest. In a part of the perennial garden, the food forest garden, I have planted some winter squashes in the understory under the fruit trees, but this is just for this year. In the fall or next spring I will be planting this part with perennial plants. As you can see, these are really doing great and loving the warm weather. There are lots of fruits on them. Which I'm really happy about, because winter squash are a very important crop for us, since we can store them for the winter, and that way we can be self-sufficient in the winter as well. And these plants too have been planted through the cardboard mulch, so that means their roots have stayed moist even though they have not been watered the past 3 weeks at all, and before that very sparingly. So this was a little post-vacation tour of our permaculture garden, and I think this extreme summer has really shown the validity and success of the permaculture gardening techniques that we use. I hope you enjoyed the video and found some inspiration in it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you again next time. Happy gardening!